Welcome. My name is Roger Berkowitz, and I'm the founder and academic director here at the Hannah Arendt Center at Bard College. Welcome to the virtual reading group. We are reading Arendt's book, Crises of the Republic. This is one of those books. It's probably the book that I most recommend to people, maybe first coming to Arendt, or especially if they're interested in politics. These are three essays and an interview in which Arendt is talking about political issues. The first one, which we're going to talk about today, Lying in Politics, is about the Vietnam War and is specifically a response to the publication of the Pentagon Papers, first in the newspapers, the New York Times and others, and then in a Bantam Books edition. Civil Disobedience is about the civil disobedience of the 1960s, and On Violence is about, again, the glorification of violence and why she thinks violence has become such a problem and an ideology and a need in the late 20th century, and I would say into the 21st century. And then Thoughts on Politics and Revolution is one of her later interviews that is, again, quite driven by her. These are all sort of essays driven by her worries about and response to the unsettlement of the 1960s. And insofar as she does respond to those, these, I think, are some of the best opportunities for us to see Arendt thinking about the world, thinking about politics, thinking about issues, and trying to bring her methods of thinking and analysis to bear on them. In that sense, they're in a way, they're volume 2 of her earlier book, published in the 1950s, Between Past and Future. And in Between Past and Future, she publishes eventually 8 essays in the second edition, which she calls Exercises in Thinking about Politics. How do we think about politics? And she says we've lost that habit, largely, and the argument of that book is that the history of tradition, for most of human history, we've lived within traditions, whether religious traditions or political traditions or familial or national traditions, and those traditions have largely given us the banisters with which to see the world, the guideposts. And the first few essays in Between Past and Future are about the break in tradition, how she thinks a number of things culminating in the rise of totalitarian movements break and destroy this traditional guideposts that keep us in a certain way of politics. And she says, in most of human history, when we have those guideposts, most of us don't need to think too much about politics. We just follow the guideposts. And, sometimes we don't, and sometimes things are bad, but we come back to them. But in an age in which the guideposts have dissolved or broken or been shattered, suddenly we're in this situation where we all need to think. And so she begins these exercises in thinking in Between Past and Future. The essays in Between Past and Future are brilliant, and they're some, I think, the most important essays she writes, but they're a little bit still, she's thinking through this stuff, they're still very philosophical, and they're sometimes difficult. I think they're for someone first coming to Hannah Arendt and maybe not trained in philosophy, there's a lot of difficult passages in them. What I like about the essays in Crises of the Republic is later in her life, she's become much more adept at writing for a public audience. And these are essays that I think are much more comprehensible, much easier to grasp. And so they really do boil things down to the basics, and I like that about them. So I'm excited that we'll be reading the book. Um, uh, we start today with lying in politics. Uh, this is a companion essay to the essay Truth in Politics, which was Truth in Politics was first published in the New Yorker and then republished in the second edition of Between Past and Future. Lying in Politics was first published in the New York Review of Books in 1971, as I said, in response to the publication of the Pentagon Papers. It begins with an epigraph by McNamara, the Secretary of Defense, Robert S. McNamara. And I think the reason she begins with this epigraph is the second word of the epigraph. He writes, the picture of the world's greatest superpower, killing or seriously injuring 1,000 non-combatants a week, while trying to pound a tiny backward nation into submission on an issue whose merits are hotly disputed, is not a pretty one. The fact that he talks about this picture, this image, is so much of what she is going to want to talk about in this essay. This essay is about the way a number of different groups of people in the 1960s lost touch with reality. And they replaced reality with different things. One group replaced reality with ideologies. One group replaced reality with theories and hypotheses. What unites the ideologists and what she calls the problem solvers is that they both replace reality, and they're able to do so because they're consumed by their minds and thus images rather than facts and reality. And so in many ways, this is an essay about the dangers of turning towards a discussion of images and our mental approach to the world. And so the people who are at risk, and the people she's talking about here, are intellectuals. And in another essay in this book that we'll come across when we read on violence, she's going to say that the entrance of intellectuals into politics is one of the most dangerous events of modern history. And I mean, I think for many of us who are so-called intellectuals, we think, what is she talking about? Why are intellectuals dangerous in politics? But her answer is that intellectuals are really gifted at one particular thing, which is obfuscating reality and setting reality into theories, hypotheses, ideologies, stories, and teaching ourselves that we are better at understanding reality than reality itself. And so that is in many ways sort of underlying thesis and argument of this essay. There's 5 parts to the essay that she divides it into. I'll just quickly summarize them, and then we'll have a discussion. Part 1 makes the basic claim that what the Pentagon Papers is really about is deception, what she calls the credibility gap, the quicksand of lies, the doctor damage reports, the phony body counts, the progress reports that were there and became lies in public. The facts were there. The facts had been reported, and yet somehow these lies became the official story. We were winning the war, that there weren't really that many American soldiers dying, and so the deception was the issue that the Pentagon Papers was trying to uncover. She then makes this point, which is developed much more fully in her essay Truth in Politics, which was published a few years before this, that the background of this question about lying in politics is that truth and politics don't have a very close relation. Politics has always been about lying. Politicians have always lied, and in fact, that was one of the things you expected politicians to do. But she takes this in a very powerful way that's connected with her thinking, which is that freedom, she says, freedom and action, the ability to be free, in its essence means to lie about the world. Because if you're going to be free and change the world, the first thing you have to do is get out of the world you're currently in, which means you have to lie about it. So every great politician, every great politician. So Napoleon has to say, all of us are equal. And that's a lie. And certainly in French society in the 18th century, that was a lie. And yet he has to make that equality and fraternity, he has to make it real. And so in order to get there, to do politics, to change the world, you have to lie. Martin Luther King, if he wants to say, I have a dream that the color doesn't matter, of course that's a lie. And yet if you want to achieve political change, you have to lie. And so she says that the deliberate denial of factual truth, the ability to lie, and the capacity to change facts, the ability to act, are interconnected and are the prerequisite for political action. You can't really be a political actor without lying. And so, that's the background here. And yet what she says is, while lying is important for politics on some level, you can't lie too much. Because if you lie too much, you lose truth. And you lose the stabilizing factor that we share a common world, which she'll call, again in this other essay, Truth and Politics, the earth under our feet and the sky over our heads. And so there has to be some basis for truth, even though politics is in some sense about lying. And so when you think about that, the essay, Lying in Politics, is about deception, about the way that the deception that happened during the Vietnam War and the self-deception was so extreme that it began to threaten the stabilizing factors of the world that we share. And that, I think, is part of her thesis. Parts 2 and 3 are about what she calls new kinds of lying that emerge in the modern age. The first one is public relations. The idea that much of what government now does is taken from PR firms and PR tactics. And what she says is the goal of so much of government policy now is actually not policy. It's not to actually effect policy or make people's lives better. It's to create images of success and to create an image that we're changing, making people's lives better. And so we actually don't care so much about the facts. We care much more about the images. And that comes from the importation of communications directors and PR people and speechwriters and all these people who are increasingly important in not only in business, but in government. And what she says, she says on page 18, the goal was now the image itself. And she says later that these image makers thought that manipulation is the rule of the people's minds and hence the true ruler of the world. The point is, if you can make people think you're doing well, if you can make people think you're winning the war, if you can make people think you're helping the economy, if you can make people think you won the Iraq War, if you can make people think that race relations are getting better, that's as important as actually getting the things better. And she says that there were 2 or 3 ways that this focus on thinking and images won out. One is the bureaucratic model. Insofar as bureaucracy keeps us in our little bureaus, and no one's fully responsible. All we have to do is do our job. It facilitates this focus on our doing our job and our doing what's right and not actually worried about the facts of the world. And then the second is that ideologists come in and offer ideologies to explain everything. Part 3 continues this, and she simply says and this is actually, I think, really important for what's going on right now around the impeachment debates. She makes a distinction between the intelligence community and the civilian and military members of the government who she calls problem solvers. What she says is the intelligence community actually fought back and offered facts, whereas the problem solvers and the military people either focus on ideologies or theories or hypotheses and divisions. And so she was very, in a way, impressed that the intelligence community did its job and laid the facts out. And what she was amazed by is that the problem solvers, these intellectuals from universities and think tanks, took the facts and massaged them to fit the ideologies and the goals that the politicians wanted. And she asks, how could they? And this is now part 4 of the essay. How could these problem solvers actually ignore the facts that were given to them by the intelligence community and create such a colossal waste of resources and failure of the Vietnam War? And she gives 3 answers to that. One is self-deception. The problem solvers came to believe their own lies. Another is that because they were focused on the mind, because they were focused on psychology and theories and hypotheses, they didn't actually look to the world, to reality. They didn't judge the world. They simply calculated. They turned everything into numbers and theories and theorems, and they, in a sense, looked at the odds and said, well, maybe if we bomb these factories, North Vietnam will stop supporting the people in the South. And, well, we don't know that's going to be the case, but we'll try it, and maybe it'll work. And they sort of assumed that these calculations were worthwhile. But the biggest reason, she says, that the intellectuals completely ignored facts and reality was ideology. Ideologies of the right, on the one hand, spoke about a monolithic communism, and Vietnam was part of that and had to be stopped. They talked about a second Munich, so that if you allow for, if you don't stop the march of Nazism, it will just destroy the world. And third, that Diem was a Churchill of Asia. And she says these were clearly ridiculous and absurd ideas, and yet they fit with a certain Cold War ideology of the right. On the other hand, she says there were ideologies of the left, namely that the U.S. was an imperialist, Nazi, and fascist regime, and 2, that the massacres in Vietnam were genocides. And she said these were also absurd and de facto claims. But what she said is that the left's ideologies led to a condoning of the war crimes that were done by the right, because they basically made it seem like both sides were out of touch with factual reality. And this brings us to really the ultimate thesis of her book, which is that the root cause of the defactualization of the world and that allowed the kind of the defactualization and the deception and the credibility gap of the Vietnam War to happen was that defactualization and problem solving, both, this is on page 42, were welcomed because disregard of reality was inherent in the policies and goals themselves. This is an exceptional claim. The entire government, she's suggesting, the goals and the policies, just didn't concern themselves with reality. They weren't about reality. They were about ideologies, and they were about theories and hypotheses. And this, she says in the On Violence essay, but I think it's important to bring it in, is the danger of over-intellectualizing politics. The last part, she says, as bad as the Vietnam War was, the one good thing that came out of it is the Pentagon Papers, in which a bunch of people sat down and said, what did we do wrong and how did we get here? Unfortunately, she says, most people in government will never read the Pentagon Papers. It was too big, and they'll just sort of put it on their desk and never read it. But it actually is an extraordinary document that she says only could happen in America, and it allows for us to regain our sanity and understand our mistake, which was to give up reality for these kind of deceptions. Okay, that's what I wanted to say as an introduction, and maybe now are there any immediate responses or thoughts before I go into the chat?
Roger, it's Margaret. Can you hear me? Can you guys hear me?
I think Margaret is talking. Hold on. Can you say it again, Margaret? My mic was off.
Hi, I was just asking, can anybody hear me? You guys can hear me? Okay. I guess I wanted to pick up on, I think Bob is also alluding to this in the chat area. It seemed to me somewhat simplistic on her part to take aspirational goal setting and metrics calculations to accomplish tasks, out and out deception and lying, and just throw them all into the bucket and say, well, that's the same thing and it's bad and everybody free of such bad banisters or even good ones. And so I wondered that she didn't seem to have delineation between, aspirational goal setting for the group or the polis as opposed to deception for self-interest.
Yeah, I mean, okay. So she talks about. Can you turn your mic off now so I don't hear the typing? She talks about this distinction between two main groups: the ideologists, who are sort of, I guess the main one is Dean Rusk, and these problem solvers. And the ideologists are more like what I think Margaret is calling liars. They're people who, whether they're caught up in an ideology or propagating an ideology, are simply saying things that aren't true. To say that Diem was like Churchill, she says it's just not true. To say that all communist regimes are part of a grand Sino-Soviet conspiracy is simply not true. Some of these people clearly know that and are lying very self-consciously. Some of these people maybe actually believe it. But what she says is, it's amazing how even the people who were lying come to believe it. Yeah, she tells that little story, the anecdote from the medieval soldier who is put up on sentry duty, and shouts, the enemy's coming, sort of as a joke, and then everyone runs to the battalion, everyone runs to protect the city, and then the soldier runs to protect the city too, thinking I should protect the city, when he knows it was a lie. He made it up. And what she says is it's amazing how quickly and easily we deceive ourselves. So, I think one of, I take some of the question that Margaret and I see now Bob is asking is, to what extent are people in power today lying versus deceiving or self-deceiving? And I think one of the things, I'd love to hear people's thoughts on it, but one of the things Arendt is saying is it's so easy for us to come to believe our lies, even if we know that we began them as lies. Why is that? Because once we tell the lie, we begin to live in the world of that lie. She says there's nobody easier to live in a completely fictional world than the President of the United States, right? She says that on page where does she say that? It's an important point. It's on page 8 to 9. 9. She said, oddly enough, the only person likely to be an ideal victim of complete manipulation is the President of the United States. Because of the immensity of his job, he must surround himself with advisors, the national security managers, as they recently have been called by Richard Barnett, who exercise their power chiefly by filtering the information that reaches the president and by interpreting the outside world for him. The president, one is tempted to argue, allegedly the most powerful man of the most powerful country, is the only person in this country whose range of choices can be predetermined. Now, the current president is not nearly as insulated by his advisors as President Johnson was. But interestingly enough, the current president is insulated in another way by his Twitter feed. And I think one of the things that I thought about this time reading this essay that I probably hadn't thought about as much last time, or the last times I've read it, is the way that social media, especially those who spend a lot of time and get their news from Twitter and Facebook, is sort of turning many people into the kind of insulated kinds of people like she's saying the president would be, who simply are so surrounded by people who determine what they see and read, that these people no longer are free to make their own choices about what they see and read.
So, Roger?
Yeah, go ahead. Who's that?
So, what about the, sort of devil's advocate that if you look at it from the other direction, that the success of, be it manipulation, advertisement, PR, social media, and whatnot, wouldn't work were it not bias confirmation of already in some ways existing?
Say that it wouldn't work if not for what?
If not for the fact that it is essentially confirming views that already exist, confirming views that to some extent exist.
Yes, well, I mean, so your confirmation bias, right? I think that's right. I mean, one of the things she says that I also think is something that many of us don't think about on the page before this, page 8, is that public relations has a limit. It's not unlimited. You can't simply convince. She's like, the whole point of PR is to convince me to buy Ivory soap or Dove soap instead of Colgate soap or whatever, one toothpaste versus another. She goes, but in politics, public relations has a limit, which is that people, in the end, just disagree. And no amount of PR is going to convince me of something I fundamentally disagree with, unless I am tortured or terrorized to do so. She thinks that people's opinions, to some degree, are too core to their identity to be affected by PR. That I take maybe is one way to think about confirmation bias. That we will ignore the facts that disagree with our opinions, and we will embrace the facts that do. I guess what I would say is that, and again, this is just speculation right here. I'm happy to hear what you guys think. Is that there's a lot more wiggle room in that. I mean, I think we have maybe certain opinions that will never change, but there are some levels of opinions that do change. And if we never actually confront opinions that are different from ours and never confront real meaningful arguments except in the way that they're just disdained or have contempt, we really don't have an opportunity to engage with and let reality pierce our ideological bubble, the coherent story we tell ourselves. I mean, I'm always struck by her claim in Eichmann in Jerusalem, or her quote of Eichmann, where he was asked by one of the judges whether in any time in all the years he worked for the Nazis, did anyone actually ever tell him that what he was doing was wrong? And he said, no. No one had ever actually said that. An exceptional claim. And what Arendt says is, many of the people who did resist the Nazis are people who confronted someone who said, that's just wrong. And that encountering people outside of your bubble, outside of your world, can have some impact, if not total impact. And
Roger,
so,
how does that apply to this reading group? I mean, we're all pretty much of a similar mind, aren't we? Are there any real conservatives here? And I don't mean Trumpistas, I mean real conservatives.
I think so. I don't have an ideological test, but I know there are.
Rod,
Yeah.
can I just jump in for a second? It's Sam. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So Arendt also says in this, so I think there's a difference between lies and ideology, and the way that she's thinking about the evolution of the lie in political terms over time. So if truth and politics have never been on good terms since the way in which the lie has been used, lies have always been accepted as a form of political rhetoric, right? Lies have always been a part of political life. We accept them up to a certain degree. And I think that's in part what you were just saying. Like, we're willing to accept a lie to a certain amount historically. Machiavelli talks about the virtuous lie, but something fundamentally changes with the way that lying is used in politics when lies suddenly become subject to Madison Avenue marketing techniques and then create artificial worlds that are ideological. And here she's really echoing the end of Origins of Totalitarianism, where she talks about propaganda and the way in which mass leaders create an artificial ideological realm which is cut off from reality. And she says that they have to guard that realm of ideology so that truth cannot pierce through it. So I think she's talking about the way in which lies turn into, mass marketing propaganda and ideology in that sense, which allows for the self-delusion here. And that's different than the political lie, which has always been necessary to win political contests, to shape opinion, right? So there's kind of this good line there. Yeah.
One thing I'd say in response to that is she's doing something in this essay that she doesn't do anywhere else, which is distinguishing the ideologists from the what she calls the problem solvers, and she says a little bit about this in Origins of Totalitarianism, but the question she keeps framing for herself in this essay is, why did the problem solvers who weren't ideologists, she says, go along with the ideology, right? Why did they why did they do it? How could they, in some sense? And I take it her answer is that even though they themselves were not consumed by the ideology, they were prepared for it, she says, by the arrogance of the mind and the utterly irrational confidence in the calculability of reality. This is on page 38 to 39. And I think that's a really important. And then on page 41, where she says, but though the problem solvers did not believe in the ideologies, they had different methods of defactualization that provided the atmosphere and the background against which the problem solvers then went to work. And those different methods of defactualization are not ideological in her mind. They're bureaucratic, and they're a belief in theories and hypotheses and social science, and saying that there's, well, it could be this, it could be that, and then we'll find some middle ground and things. And so I think Sam's right that, you know, there's differences, and she is talking about ideologies here, but I think I'd like to at least hold open the idea that many of the people who are, I would say, the vast majority of the people who are in government and in positions of power and are propagating what ideologies today are not themselves believers in the ideologies, but they're people who, as she says, have different methods of defactualization based on the atmosphere and background in which they work. I don't know if that is something you'd accept, Sam, but
Can I say
go ahead.
something?
I think just to add to that really quickly and build off of it, you know, it almost makes it worse in the sense, because then when she says that lies are more plausible, more appealing to reason than reality, right? That the liar has the great advantage of knowing beforehand what the audience wishes to hear.
That's right.
You know, it's the one who is crafting the ideology that's being sold as a form of political rhetoric to shape, you know, this new fictitious reality, of course, doesn't actually buy into the lie, but what they see is what the people are hungry for. They see how the people want to inhabit this kind of fictitious reality, and they can construct that. And so then I think that's where we see these new techniques and advertising she's drawing in, you know, make the creation of a fictitious world even more powerful than they were in the 19th century. And I think this absolutely extends to the way in which we construct these artificial worlds today on social media platforms, and the ways in which, you know, we're not even always aware of how we're acting, and they're being constructed for us. Susan, you wanted to jump in?
I wanted to say something. Can I? Daphna.
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
In the book that we just finished reading, In the Life of the Mind, we went through this long process where her regard for truth was not particularly, what she preferred was the search for meaning rather than the search for truth in thinking. And I think in this article, in your initial statement, when you said something about someone like Martin Luther King and his I have a dream being not truth, I'm not sure that that is something that she would lump into the same group as these ideologists or problem solvers. I think that was his imagination. And she says, the deliberate denial of factual truth, the capacity, blah, 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 they owe their existence to the same source, imagination. Imagination being for her a very important factor in creativity and things that she has seemed to appreciate or evolve. I'm not sure how you lump that together with the political aspect of, you know, deception. I'm not sure that that's
Good.
Same thing.
No, it's not. So she talks about a number of different kinds of truths. And so one kind of truth is what she will call philosophical or rational truth. Or rational truth, 2 + 2 = 4, right? And that's not something you argue over. It's provable or not. Then there's philosophical truth, which is come through through a dialogue, but it's the truth of things, and it's supposed to get you to something true. That it's better to, in some sense, suffer wrong than do wrong would be one example she uses. And then she says there's political or factual truth, but that's not truth. That's what she calls opinion. And the conflict, she says, in most of history between rational truth and factual truth or opinion has been won by opinion, so that we can today make all facts into mere opinions. And the chances of a fact surviving the onslaught of ideology or power that tries to erase it is very slim, we'll say. This is all from the essay Truth and Politics, which should really be read in some sense as a companion piece to this. It's a prior piece, and she cites it in here on page 6. She says, check out my essay on Truth and Politics. So the point is that for her, when we're talking about politics, we're talking about factual truths, and we're talking about factual truths that are contingent and that in the end can be erased and done away with by power. And in some sense, all you have is opinion. And yet, and here's the one thing I'll say is, she does want to say that if we completely abandon factual truth and all we have is opinions, and there's nothing that we all agree on, then there's no way to have a conversation. There's no way to be part of a common world. And so in some sense, the factual truth, she says, is the ground on which we stand and the sky above us. But how does that factual truth emerge? I mean, because it's contingent and in some sense can be overturned. It's something that is very fragile. And a lot of, and I think a big part of the argument she's making is that if we give ourselves over to the ideologists and the problem solvers and allow people to simply so consistently reject and ignore reality and turn reality to their own purposes through theories and hypotheses and ideologies, we will in the end lose the common world, the ground on which we stand and the sky above us. And that's the great danger that she sees in the rise of ideologies and problem solvers and intellectuals and this rejection of reality. Is that?
Yeah, can I just add, I think as much as we might want to push against it, for our no matter how progressive it is still a form of ideology that orients us away from the present factual reality of our political situation. And as long as, so at the very beginning of Origin, she says, I wrote this against, a backdrop of radical hope and radical despair. MLK is very much the embodiment and thinking about a politics that's future oriented in that way. And I think Roger is right to put that together with ideologists in that sense. And as much as we might not like that in Arendt, I think that's very present.
Susan, did you want to say something before or not? So Bob writes, what a quaint time 1974 was. The liars then were, if not ashamed, at least worried about how lies would be received. Trump doesn't care. He has taken facts off the table. Yeah, I mean, it's I think as you read an essay like this, and this is of course one of the essays that has been most talked about of Arendt's in the last 2 years, you can't help but ask what she would write, or how this applies to, or how this helps us understand the current situation. And I would, this conversation I think Sam and I were having, and that I've been suggesting, is that we need to, in some sense, separate these, at least these three different groups that she talks about in this essay. So on the one hand, the intelligence community that presents facts, and this whole whistleblowing phenomena, and the rise of the deep state against Trump that we've witnessed in the last month and a half is an extraordinary example of that. Whatever you think of the intelligence agencies, here is a case in which a lot of civil servants are saying, we are fighting back against a government that we think is ignoring what we say, and manipulating it, and rejecting the facts in order to build a fictional world. Then you have, the president and his top advisors, who I think are what I would call the ideologists, the people who, whether intentionally or self-deceptively, or maybe some weird combination of the both, are articulating an ideology. What is that ideology? When Trump was first running and when he got elected, I made the case in this group and to others and in print that he didn't really have a coherent ideology. I'm not sure he does, but he has certain ones, and a lot of it is simply about acquiring power, but a lot of it is simply destroying any belief in a factual, real world. And then you have the people in the middle, the problem solvers, the many people who I don't think per se, who know that Trump is lying and know that he is, completely deceptive, and yet somehow justify it, and become the sort of, become the civilized face of the Republican Party, to the extent such a thing is left. And so I think it's helpful to see it in those three ways. I don't know, Bob, does that sound right, or is that wrong? And it's so different, and we shouldn't even consider it.
Trump is a consummate nihilist. He's, destroying in foreign affairs and domestic affairs agencies. But I think a lot of his supporters feel that he's achieving what they are out for. He's anti-abortion, reducing taxes. He's lifting environmental constraints. So, those people can support him because that's what they want. Trump himself, he's, to some extent, I think he's just having a ball, as, like I say, the consummate nihilist. His immediate impulse seems to be to destroy.
Yeah, I mean, if you take my understanding that it's been, and again, I'm willing to reconsider it, which is that Trump is really, his only ideology is power, right? And achieving power, which is nihilism, which is what Bob is saying. Then what you have is these these others who say, well, he's getting rid of regulations, and he's cutting out welfare, and he's protecting abortion. They're like the problem solvers that Arendt says Well, they calculate and they have theories and they realize, well, we're actually accomplishing things we want to accomplish, so that's okay. But she says they don't judge. And when she says that, she says they don't realize that in doing certain things that we're accomplishing, we're killing innocent people, and we're destroying U.S. power. And I think that's very much visible today, that those who say, well, Trump's giving us things we want, and therefore we can ignore the fact that he's throwing a complete nihilist atomic bomb into our entire democratic political process, ignore the fact that there's a judgment that's missing, that we are going to lose something deep in this sort of fanaticism for making calculations and justifying what he's doing.
Well, how many of us criticized Obama when he was throwing out executive orders and when he was targeting enemies like that guy from New Mexico? I don't remember his name. Let's put ourselves in a somewhat comparable, by no means in the same magnitude position.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think a lot of us did criticize him for the executive orders, but we also accepted it because we calculated that it was okay. I mean, I don't, I won't speak for everyone. I mean, I was critical of Obama for that. What?
No, Roger?
Yeah.
It's Margaret again. I mean, aside the fact that, the times we're in this country didn't start with Trump, what would Arendt say in this essay about the cadre of people who voted for Trump precisely because of that nihilistic desire to blow everything up? That's what they want.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's different levels of that. So there's some people who I would call good government, small government people who believe that our government had gotten so big and so complicated and so foreign and so unresponsive to the wishes of everyday people that the only way to restore it was to blow it up. That's one group. And then I think there's a group of what we might call white supremacists / survivalists / patriot group people who think you should blow it up so that they can sort of take over. I think she would have different views of them, but what would she think of them? I think she would say that the first group was the kind of over-intellectual, calculating problem solvers who lack all judgment, right?
But there are a lot of people in that first group. I mean, and probably I'm not really focusing on, the white supremacist portion of it because they do have an ideology. But I'm talking about people, and I've encountered plenty of them, who are by no means intellectuals, would not describe themselves as such, but who really have a very simple-minded view that things are screwed up, so let's just throw the whole thing up in the air, and that seems like a better idea.
Well, I mean, okay, we can debate whether they're intellectuals or not. I mean, I think, for the last 3 or 4 or 5 election cycles, there's been outsider candidates who have attracted large numbers of people, right? And I think the reason a lot of these outsider candidates attract people is because there's a lot of people, and I'll count myself among them, who think that the country has lost its way and that you, in a way, need to shake things up. But all of these outsider candidates, until Trump, blew up because people realized, there might be a chance that we break things up and it gets better, but there's a bigger chance that these people are going to screw it up worse.
I need to say something if you
Yeah.
if you don't mind, Roger. I think that the phenomena that we're seeing in the United States is a global phenomena. It's not just the United States right now. We're seeing it in Europe, we're seeing it in other countries. And I think that a lot of this is determined by the fact that people, a huge number of people feel that this is their revolution. It's their revolution against the new feudal hierarchy that has been created by enormous inequalities of wealth. And we have people who have been so entitled now for quite some time. Trump is a representative of that, and to a large number of people, so are the Clintons. But it's the same in England, and it's the same in other countries in Europe. So maybe Trump is the worst because he's heading the biggest, and because he is such a complete idiot. I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to say that, but anyway, he is a complete idiot, and so he represents the worst of that particular movement. And I don't think that Hannah Arendt would concentrate, if she were alive today, only on the United States. I think her perspective would be more global, and then it would be: is this really a revolution, and are we representing the ancien regime? Are we the intellectuals who are left over from a period? And that's what's so problematic here. I mean, our reality is being shaken by that.
Well,
Sorry, mini lecture over.
No, I mean, I think I've said this many times in this group. I hope that this is a global phenomenon. I agree with you on that. I think where you and I may slightly disagree is your maybe more hopeful idea that this is driven by people upset about inequality, Daphne, whereas I don't see that as at all the driving issue. I see the driving issue of this global phenomena to be one of nationalism and identity. What unites all these different movements around the world is an opposition to immigration and refugees. Yes, in each country you can find other issues, but what unites them all and what is the driving force is an opposition to cosmopolitan globalism, however you want to define that.
But
And
Roger, scapegoating seems to agree completely with what Daphne is saying.
say, I didn't hear who said that, and I didn't hear what you said.
It's Margaret. I mean, doesn't that scapegoating on a global scale currently agree very much with what Daphne is saying?
Well, it does in one sense that it's a global scale. I mean, maybe Daphne agrees with what I said, but there's a huge debate in the world of people like us about whether what's happening is driven by economics or whether it's driven by identity. I took Daphne to be saying, and I may have gotten it wrong, that it's driven by economics and inequality. I'm suggesting that it's much more driven by identity and a return and a feeling of many people, and now many of these people are less educated and poor, but not all of them, but a feeling of many people that the identity and their sense of who they are as Americans or British or German or French or Hungarian or whatever it is being threatened by, I would say, at least two groups, and we could probably add more, but one is immigrants and refugees from third world or what they consider to be lesser countries, what Trump calls whatever the shitholes or whatever. And the other is people like us, globalists, internationalists, cosmopolitans, who identify more with a cosmopolitan elite than with a national identity. I don't know, Daphne. Do we agree, Daphne, or is there a difference?
Well, I think that
Roger.
I'm an economist, so my point of departure is largely driven by that perception. I don't know if you're familiar with Branko Milanovic, who just came out with a new book this week. He talks about the economic benefits of immigration and the distortion that most people feel that these are people coming to take away our jobs. And the fear then stokes nationalism because people like us are going to lose to the Chinese who are taking away all of our patents and all of our industry, and to these horribly stinky, dark people who are coming from shithole countries and taking away labor that actually we would never want to do anyway. And so there's a whole, I think it's a conflagration of many reasons, but the resentment is the same, I feel, in the entire world as the one that may be stoked to some extent the French Revolution. And Hannah Arendt writes a lot about revolution, the whole idea that we, we, the salt of the earth, have been deprived of our national and natural human rights. And these newcomers are taking them away. So it could be economic and it could be nationalist fervor, but I think they do sort of conflate.
What resonates with me in this is, from the point of view of this particular essay, is the public relations and the tie-in between truth and public relations and the political. And with respect to our contemporary situation, we have a situation where we can target all these different individuals that Roger's talking about, the intellectual, the policymaker, the person who believes that it's economic, the person who believes it's an identity. And we can not only do that, we can target exactly what identity they're concerned about. And then we can manufacture the truth, which is what Arendt here says is lying, to convince that person and to influence that person to give us the power, which is exactly what the policymakers in this essay were really concerned about. At one point in the essay, I don't have the book in front of me, I think that Arendt said something like, politics means the next election. And I think we're certainly seeing that now. So I really think what everyone said is relevant and has merit. But the fact of it is, we're in a situation today where the very concerns that Arendt raises in this essay is being used for the purpose of obtaining power.
I wanted to talk about something here. If you can hear me. I don't know how much Arendt deals with in her essay. I'm very strong that we've been accepting the framing of the deplorables, if you will, or whatever, on one side, and then the globalist intellectuals or the liberal international order we hear a lot about. But I think there's this other realm, Janos Varoufakis and, if you will, Bernie Sanders, who represent this whole other thing, the actual alternative that will deliver, like the Green New Deal, as an example, will deliver what these disaffected folks want, will actually help the coal miners and return our solar manufacturing, etc., and will provide universal health care and a long list of positive alternatives, but we don't hear much about that. Bernie is not on the commercial media, and he doesn't present himself, which he could easily afford to do, on his own TV programming, buying the time, which is what my line is. And that's kind of where I think is a valuable discussion for us, is this positive alternative and fleshing that out and presenting that. And instead of accepting that the frame that all there is this far right and this more of the same thing, like Obama, who didn't deliver anything for the ordinary people. He really didn't. There was no labor law, long list of stuff he carried on, essentially the same foreign policy, continued with the military contractors. I don't want to spend time on that. This positive alternative is missing in the conversation. That's what bothers me. And Arendt in this essay does not, I know, deal with that particularly, but these folks who wrote the Pentagon paper are so sure, they're so locked into their worldview without challenge, and that's still the case right now. The whole Syria discussion was all about what kind of militarism should we do instead of not being there at all. The Democrats want some kind of aggressive militarism, as do the Republicans. There's nobody saying we shouldn't be there in the first place at all. And a whole UN-supported negotiation, consideration. And so anyway, that's my addition to this conversation.
No, I think Trump is saying we shouldn't be there in the first place.
Well, he doesn't do that, though. He says that, but he doesn't do it. He's still there. Move the troops from one place to another, to the oil fields.
So I want to do two things in the last few comments I'll respond to. One is I'm certainly not going to talk too much about Bernie or not. You guys have your own political views. I would say that let me talk about Bernie by answering the other question or responding to the other question that was asked about the problem solvers. And there's another question someone else in the Ken, I think, asked about this. Can I elaborate on the problem solvers? So in the chat. And so let me talk a little bit about that, because she says a number of things about problem solvers. So it begins somewhere around page 10, if you want to follow along in the text. But she says they were men of great self-confidence. And I think that's an important point. These are people who believe that their intellect can explain the world and master it. Now, I mean, again, I'm not interested in the politics of this, but I think Bernie is a man of great self-confidence, right? As is Trump in his own way, and as is Elizabeth Warren and most people who run for. You don't run for president if you don't have a lot of self-confidence. She says that these problem solvers lied not so much for their country as for its image. In the context here, what she meant is they were lying because they wanted to preserve this idea as an America, as a country that protects its friends, that honors its commitments, that is powerful. But they didn't actually spend a whole lot of time talking about the interests of what was actually at stake in Indochina. And she says there was all this evidence, or at least the intelligence community, she said over and over again, if Vietnam falls to the communists, not much else will happen. I mean, that was their assessment. And yet, and so there wasn't a whole lot of talk about the actual interests involved. There was more talk about the image. She says they believed politics is but a variety of public relations, which is that it's about winning people's minds, but not actually giving them, making their lives better. And, it may be that we're going to lose hundreds of thousands of soldiers fighting a war, but we'll feel like we honor commitments. And we feel like we are, defending the free world. And so that's a PR event that's not actually about the good of the country. She says they're in love with theory, the world of sheer mental effort. I mean, now, this is also a critique she's going to make of the Marxists. And, it's one that one could make of someone like Bernie, or, if they consider him a democratic socialist. Insofar as one of the things she says about the Marxists is they have their theory, and whenever the facts don't fit the theory, they ignore those facts. The problem solvers are people who get caught up in theories. We are, I believe in, phonics, or I believe in whole language learning, right? And one of the things that was great at the conference that we had a few weeks ago is John McWhorter got up and said, you want to really deal with race in this country, teach phonics, right? Stop this ideological claim that we don't want to teach phonics because it's not treating the whole language and whatever. He goes, that's just not going to work. Look at reality, and if you want to actually get people to read, teach phonics. I think a lot of the healthcare debate, to me, in the Democratic feels like that. One person has one theory, another person has another theory, and theory seems to drive much more than actually the facts on the ground. And people get caught up in this sort of mental effort of showing that their theory will work. And whenever a fact shows up that we can't pay for it, or we can't afford this, or that won't work, we ignore that fact or we massage it away. I think that's what problem solvers are really good at for her. She says, absent the scientists' patience as men of action, they will be tempted to fit their reality into their theory. And again, so the theory is what's dominant and the reality is what they fit in. She talks about reasons of urgency to contingency. She'll cite later in this book the fecundity of the unexpected always frustrates the statesman's best laid plans. I'm paraphrasing. But she's contemptuous of social scientists and intellectuals and thinkers and problem solvers who somehow think that they can have a plan to deal with things. She thinks reality is a lot more complex than plans. And so she's worried about people who bring plans to bear in politics. And then the rule of three options, where she says, well, the liberals say this, the conservatives say this, what we really need is that. And she says that immediately all it does is divide the world into three ideas, as if the whole world fits into those three ideas. And that's, again, a rationalist aversion of the complexity and depth of modernity. So, I guess part of this is just an attempt to answer the question in the chat about, can I say more about problem solvers? But to tie it into some politics, I think on both the left and the right, and I'm trying to be, I think there are people, I think our politics is now dominated by what she would call problem solvers. And one of the problems that leads to is that we don't pay attention to real interests and the complexity of reality.
This is Robert. I just wanted to make a point about the problem solvers, which I think maybe gets a little bit lost here, is that the problem solvers, whether we're talking about Vietnam or politics, or really this principle applies, I think, to all organizations, the problem solvers are not the people on top. The problem solvers are the next tier. And the goals are set by the people on top, whether she refers to the Truman Doctrine on page 43, which we can talk about, which was, of course, being set by Truman and the Secretary of the State and Senator Vandenberg or whoever, who had their own considerations. And then the problem solvers, who are the people writing the Pentagon Papers or making these choices, are not the people setting the goals. And in any organization, the person on top is the one who's saying, these are the goals, and it's the job of the problem solver is to reach those goals. And it's a very tough position to be in. If you're an engineer at Boeing, let's say, and the top management says we can't design a new 737 airplane because it will take too long and then we'll lose market share, you've got to figure out a way to get these engines that don't quite fit to work on it. And
so Robert, everything you say I think is right. I would just add one caveat, which is that while problem solvers are under the ideologues or leaders or people who set the agenda, and their goal is to make things work, her criticism of them is that they have sought to make things work against an atmosphere and background of defactualization. And that is important. And that's an insight what she's saying is that the entire problem-solving level, which is huge and is now probably the majority of our government, is by its fundamental attitude towards its job and towards life, fundamentally defactualized.
Mm-hmm.
And that,
well, and your point about how this current rebellion of the so-called deep state is really quite remarkable, because they're not just being problem solvers. They're not just calculating. These are people who are judging, to use her phrase.
or they're at least saying, here's the facts.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is the problem solvers ignore those facts, and that's what she's pointing out. And that's what I think is so important about this essay, is to make us aware of how so many of the people in government, and we'll just talk about government for now, are, through bureaucracy and through their training and through their approach, geared towards privileging theories and hypotheses over facts. And that's an extraordinary insight that I don't know how many other people, I'm sure there's other people who've had it in different ways, but that was what she really saw from this. And I think it continues to be deeply true today.
Roger,
Yeah, go ahead.
well, I just wanted to say the difference between then and now, just getting back to the deceptions that were going on. As I recall that period when there was marches, I guess the assumption was that you could actually affect people's rationalizations. So even though we knew deception was going on, even before the Pentagon Papers came out, I mean, all those marches in Washington and all that stuff. It seems to me the difference between then and now is we slipped from deception, self-deception, into delusion. And get to Robert's point, the top guy is a deluded individual. So the idea that you're going to affect his rational, never mind the facts. I mean, he believes in conspiracy theories and mysteries and ghosts and all that kind of stuff. So we're in a big dilemma in that score. Anyway,
Yeah.
all the comments that have been made are so relevant.
I think you're absolutely right, Pat, but I will point out that she thinks that the ideologists during the Vietnam War were deluded too. She thinks to think that a little country like Vietnam was the key to United States interests was a delusion beyond delusions. It was pure ideology.
Yeah. When Kennedy presented these guys, they presented as the highest level of intelligence that we had in the country, as I recall, from all the best institutions and, all the McNamara from Ford.
Yeah. No, what all I'm saying is, that Trump's delusions are delusional. Go ahead, someone wants to say something.
Yeah.
There's a lot of.
No, I was just going to jump in, and I think this goes. Sorry, it's Sam. I think this goes to the distinction that we were drawing earlier between the intelligence community, the bureaucrats are doing the advising and constructing the reality for the politicians, and the way that the three interact with one another, which is what she's, I think, drawing our attention to here. And she's marveling at the way in which the intelligence community is so cut off from the people, which I think is in part why this essay again was picked up after 9/11 and during after Guantanamo as well. There were a number into those contemporary conversations, thinking about how that split happens at that level. And she's so the ideologists, I understand, are the bureaucrats here, but that's different than the intelligence community, which I don't hear her to be damning in this essay, but almost making an argument for an intelligence community that's more connected to the presidency.
Well, I think she's saying that in this particular instance, the intelligence community was the one community that actually dealt with facts. Whether I don't think she's making an argument that always will be the case, but it may be. I think the point is, in this case, they were the ones who looked at the facts, and everyone else, she says, ignored them.
Yeah,
I don't know who,
no, so that's what I'm saying. I think that we can read that as an argument for the importance of an intelligence community, which I think also then, it relates to what's happening right now with Trump's presidency, where we see people, where we don't see whistleblowers from the intelligence community who are trying to bring facts to disrupt.
yeah. I'm gonna just look at a couple of things from the chat. I don't know HAC, but someone wrote, I have been thinking on the limitation of the need for lying on the part of today's leaders, on the limitation of the need for lying on the part of today's leaders who tend to authoritarian measures, to the picturing of the opposition. Lying in politics seems to have lost its desirability in terms of the image making of the politicians and especially the foreign policies. For example, the most recent developments in Syria and the current president's misogynist stance with which he seems not uncomfortable. So lying in politics seems to have lost desirability, right? So, on the one hand, Arendt does say that there's ways in which lying can be desirable in politics. One is sometimes you need to lie simply as a matter of state. If a tsunami is coming and more people will die because of panic, if you tell people, do you not tell people? And there's arguments for that one way or the other, realpolitik. And then there's the lying in which we talked about earlier with Martin Luther King, where you create a new idea. But the argument here is that lying seems to have lost its desirability.
It's me, by the way, Roger. I was meaning systematic lying.
Systematic lying.
Yeah, I couldn't write it there. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, insofar as we talk about lying as systematic lying, or the new lie where you try and institute a new ideology or a propaganda. Yes, Arendt is not a fan of that kind of mass lying. That said, she's well aware that it can work. At least maybe not permanently, because she thinks that at some point, if you just completely destroy reality, that lie will eventually be shown to be incoherent and fall apart. But it can work for a long time, and a lot of what she's writing about, which she wrote about in Origins of Totalitarianism and in other books as well, is about the danger of the mass lie and the systematic lie. So what she says at the end of this essay is the other lesson, besides all this stuff about deception to take away from the Pentagon Papers, is the Pentagon Papers. The fact that in the end, these problem solvers, and this is, I think, this is actually, the hopeful turn, right? These problem solvers, these same people who were divorced from reality, who were caught up in theories, they came to see their mistake. They came to see that they had been caught up in this, and they decided to study it and look at it. And they had the freedom to do it, and then the New York Times had the freedom to publish it. And she says that is the importance, she says, of the free press. Not just and what she says is very interesting, along with what Sam was saying about the intelligence community. She says the right to put the facts out there is not enough, because what we learn is with the facts, the problem solvers and the ideologists will ignore them or use them to their advantage or destroy them. Putting the facts out is not enough. You need the right to have your opinion, which is why she thinks it's so important to have free speech and a free press that can fundamentally disagree and call out what it sees to be ideologies or mass lies on the other side. So I think that is an important. We shouldn't forget the last 2 pages of the essay, which seems so at odds with everything else, that are worth us paying attention to. So thanks for that. Kevin writes, I think Trump's ideology is simply power and retribution. Roger and Sam, are we in effect discussing the apparatus? How would Arendt say we deal with the apparatus? The apparatus, you mean what? The bureaucracy? The administrative state is. I'm not sure I know what that means, Ken.
So just, yeah, actually, I just back up a second. I'll just say that, as we have the discussion, it always sounds like we're talking about, or oftentimes we'll be like pointing at the other group and say, they're not getting it right, or they're the ones that are misinformed, whether it's the intellectuals or the Bernie people or whatever, and sort of just recognizing that we're all sort of in this, our behaviors are sort of controlled or to some degree by the media that we get and things like that. And we're sort of equal in this, what's going on in the United States and in the world today. And, how do we sort of get to a point of seeing from, understanding those influences and is there a way to sort of escape them in some cases? Does that make any sense? Maybe not, I don't know.
Are you trying to say that we should not equalize, or we should, we should recognize that we're all guilty of this, or that we have to actually make judgments about who are more or less guilty? Was that the point?
Well, I sort of just took a step back enough to understand that we are all not guilty or not guilty, but it's just like this is what's happening in culture, and I'm not sure exactly.
All I'll say to that, Ken, and I think it's a good point to make, is that Arendt does, who was it before that? David said before, Bernie's the other side. And I sort of at least suggested that maybe from an Arendtian perspective, that's not. I think the other side is the people who speak about reality, speak about facts. You have this interesting Colonel Vindman, the guy who is now who's a twin from Ukraine, who he and his brother are both colonels or lieutenant colonels and are both in the National Security Council, and this guy got up and said facts, and now the Trump administration is trying to destroy him and call him a traitor. That's the alternative. People who could work in the Trump administration, this guy Vindman, but when facts come to facts, he's going to say the facts. And I think we need much more of that. We need people who are willing to step out of the theoretical mental models and say, look, here's the world and here's the facts as I see them. And then we have to have arguments about the facts. But that I think is the alternative that Arendt is holding up. And what she likes about the Pentagon Papers is here's a group of people who said, let's go back and look at the fact of what happened and how we missed this, how we screwed up so colossally. And they laid it all out. And what she says is, it's all there, but no one actually reads it because they all think they know what the facts are and they don't actually think they need to read it. How many people went and read the 9/11 Commission on what happened at 9/11? How many people read the Mueller report? Right? We all think we know it. I'm sure there are some, but most of us think we know it and think we have, because we fit it into our theoretical framework. And what this essay is a plea for us to let our theoretical frameworks go and actually engage with the very difficult, huge morass of facts that are hard to fit into theoretical frameworks. And then, as a result, if we do that, to be much more humble and much more unwilling to think we master and control and can understand how to do things. That I take to be the thrust of the essay.
Yeah, thanks, and you answered my question too. So thanks, Roger.
So maybe we end there. It's 2:30. We're actually going to read. We're going to go week by week right now for a little bit. So we're reading next week on Friday the 15th. We're reading the next essay, Civil Disobedience, which was the topic of our conference last year, right? And I know we did read it then, but we'll read it again. It's a great essay. Enjoy reading Hannah Arendt, and we'll see you all next week. Thanks very much.
Take care, Roger.
Bye, guys. Take care.